The film opens in Mamaroneck, New York and pans into the home of Nancy, who is FaceTiming her soon-to-be husband, Ross. Nancy is nervous about their wedding, but Ross tells her it's going to be perfect. He then proceeds to show her the suite they will be staying in for their honeymoon to help settle her pre-wedding jitters. As he proceeds to the balcony to show her the view, a hand wearing a black glove slides open a door inside the room. As Ross is about to hang up, Nancy catches a glimpse of someone inside his room through her screen and asks Ross, "Who's that?" Ross says, "What?" But before he can react, the masked man pushes him over the balcony to his death. 1 year later, as Nancy is at her office, her assistant Simon informs her that her boyfriend and IT guy Doug was fired by her boss Gina. Nancy goes to see Doug and he tells her he was fired because they found embezzlement in the accounting records, and they are blaming him since he's the sacrificial IT guy. She asks if he did it, and he insists he didn't. She then asks if he would tell her if he did. He said he would. She then asks him what size her bra is. Confused, he answers AB. She then pulls a bra out of her bag and asks him why she found a size D bra in the back of his car. He tries to explain and denies he did anything wrong, but Nancy isn't buying it and tells him they are clearly over. Doug grabs Nancy's arm as she's leaving. A waiter steps in. Doug tells him to back off. The waiter tells Doug to walk away, but before he does, he hits the waiter's tray of coffee, spilling it all over him. Nancy joins a meeting with her colleague Sarah and her boss, Gina. Gina is very impressed with Nancy's latest concept, a pillow with an embedded Bluetooth speaker for playing ambient sounds. As the meeting's concluding, Nancy is taken back when none other than the waiter for the barista walks in. The waiter looks surprised to see her as well. Gina introduces him as Martin, the new IT guy. Later that night at dinner, Gina tells Nancy that Doug isn't the guy she thought she was. Nancy goes on to say she feels like she's lost all ability to judge people since Ross died. After Gina leaves, Nancy continues in conversation with her assistant, Simon. They both look at Martin and Sarah a few tables away from them. Simon tells Nancy that Sarah is still trying to get her job, and Nancy tells him to stop. He's making her paranoid, and Simon laughs. When Nancy returns home, she can be seen through a camera in the kitchen. She tells Siri to delete Doug's favorite music and to play her favorite music. As she listens to music, she looks at a photograph of Ross. She remembers back to when she admitted to Ross that before they were official, she was talking to another guy online. She goes on to tell Ross that she ghosted the other guy. But then she shows Ross a picture that the guy sent her by text that morning of a picture of roses left in her house. She said it could be fake, but Ross said it couldn't. There was too much detail in the picture. Ross tells Nancy, "I'm going to take care of this, trust me." Nancy snaps out of thinking back, and as she's getting ready for bed, all the lights inside and outside the house begin flashing. The next day, as Martin tells Gina he is finished securing her laptop, Nancy walks in. Gina leaves and Martin goes on to show Nancy all the security features he is adding to their system. She apologizes to him again for what her ex-boyfriend did to him at the barista. He laughs it off and asks if she got back together with him. She said no. He kiddingly offers to put some dating apps on her laptop. She tells him no thanks and briefly tells him about the bad experience she had with a stalker type she met online. He assures her that after he's done with her laptop, no one will get through its security. As they're conversing, he asks Nancy to dinner, but she nicely turns him down, saying that she's not ready to date another coworker just yet. He graciously understands and tells her if she has any issues with her laptop, she knows where to find him. Right after she leaves Martin's office, she receives a text from Doug saying you are going to end up like Ross in all caps. Fear and agitation covers her face. That night, as she pulls into her driveway, Doug approaches and taps on her window. Nancy confronts him about the text he sent saying she is going to end up like Ross. Dumbfounded, Doug asks what she is talking about. Nancy tells him she is going to call the cops if he doesn't leave. She pulls into the garage and Doug again insists he didn't cheat on her and asks her to give him a chance to explain, but Nancy says no and tells Siri to close the garage. As Nancy showers, she is suddenly scolded. She checks the water thermostat, and it reads 120 degrees. She sets it back to 104, then returns to her shower. As soon as she re-enters the shower, the thermostat drops to 60 degrees. Aggravated, she shuts off the shower and blames Siri. After her shower, she FaceTimes Simon and tells him about the incident with Doug in her shower. He advises her to get a restraining order. On a lighter note, she then goes on to ask Simon if she should send Martin a friend request on a dating app she installed. He tells her she should, and she smiles, happy to hear his opinion. She tells him thanks and good night. As she's falling asleep, she's unaware that her home security is hacked through her phone. The next morning when Nancy enters her office, Simon shows her that she received roses. The note reads, "When I met you, flowers started growing in the darkest part of my mind." A colleague from another city named Clark calls at that moment. He has been trying to get her to go to dinner with him for some time, and she believes he is the one who sent the roses. She tells him she will see him in Chicago before hanging up. As Nancy mingles alongside Clark at the convention, it seems she's being watched through a security camera. At that moment, she receives another text from Doug that says, "I know you're in Chicago, you can't hide from me." She tells Clark that she doesn't feel comfortable there anymore, so her and Clark have a drink in his hotel room. Soon their togetherness escalates to Clark giving Nancy a neck massage as she lies on his bed. It looks as if they are being watched through a camera on the alarm clock. She thanks Clark for the roses he sent her, and he tells her it wasn't him that sent them. Confused, she's left wondering who they were from. About that time, Nancy's phone dings. It's a picture message of Clark with his wife and kids. He tries to explain that it's not what it looks like, but Nancy wants nothing to do with him now and promptly leaves his room. Nancy resumes her evening by having a drink alone at the hotel bar. After a brief exchange with the bartender, Martin pops up at the bar. Nancy looks surprised. He explains he was asked to go to get an overview of their industry. She invites him to pull up a chair and have a drink with her. After some brief and light-hearted conversation, she asks Martin if he sent her a gift. He said he didn't, and when he does send gifts, he tends to not keep it a secret. Martin can sense something is bothering Nancy. He asks if there's something she wants to talk about. She tells him about her fiancé, Ross, and how he was murdered. Martin looks shocked. Nancy goes on to tell him that despite the police's efforts, they haven't been able to track down Ross's killer due to lack of evidence. She asks Martin if he could help her trace an unknown number since she received texts from the killer afterwards. He traces it right then and tells her the address it was initiated from. She's astonished to find it was initiated from her work address. When Nancy gets back from the convention, she finds Gina at an indoor rock climbing place and asks her if she sent her a text with a picture. Gina tells her she didn't. Gina asks Nancy if she thinks the flowers and texts could be from someone like the guy who stalked her. Nancy insists no and tells Gina not to worry about it, that she's handling it. When she gets to the office, she asks Simon if he was at the office later than usual last night. He said yes, because Sarah recruited him to help her with her presentation. She finally asks Simon if he sent her the text. He says definitely not and asks Nancy if everything is okay. She said it will be and tells him goodbye. That night, Nancy stares at the flowers she received and she drinks a glass of wine and X's people off a list of possible suspects. Her phone rings after she adds Sarah to her list and smiles when she sees that Martin has accepted her friend request she sent him. After she gets up to rinse her bowl, her sink is hacked through her laptop and won't turn on. Suddenly, as she's reaching into the sink drain, the music comes on loud. She says music off, but Siri doesn't listen. Then the garbage disposal comes on abruptly, causing Nancy to jump. Her friend Graham app then proceeds to show a picture of her on the bed while Clark is massaging her being uploaded to her feed. That night she tosses and turns because she's too hot. She checks the thermostat and it shows 96 degrees. Suddenly, her home alarm goes off and her phone rings. It's the alarm company and she tells them to call the police. When the police arrive, Nancy explains to the detective what's been going on. She assures her she will be okay, but Nancy doesn't look convinced. Nancy thinks back to a conversation she had with Ross. He said that he told the detective that the stalker bought the roses with a woman's credit card. She suddenly has an epiphany. The next morning, Nancy gets in her car to find Doug in her passenger seat. He confronts her about Clark Bailey. She tells him whatever game he's playing has to stop now. He tells her that if she doesn't give him his old life back, he will spend every day making hers miserable, then exits her car. Nancy asks herself, how does he know about Clark? As she pulls out of her driveway, her car stops. It shows security override on her car's screen. Running late, Nancy rushes into the presentation with the investors for her smart pillow. She plugs in her laptop, and her screen is made visible on the big screen TV. The presentation starts off great and is going smooth until video of her getting massaged on the bed with Clark pops up on the screen. The investors ask Gina if this is a joke, then asks if the man in the video is Clark. Nancy is quickly pulled from the meeting by Gina and scolded. Nancy tells Gina she thinks it was Sarah who messed with her presentation, but Gina tells Nancy to take a break and go home. Before leaving, Nancy goes to Martin's office. She asks Martin if he can come over to her place later to help her with her smart home system. He says he can. That same night, the detective Nancy talked to a couple of nights before starts looking through Ross's case file. It seems she is trying to make sense of Nancy's claim that Ross was murdered despite there being a lack of evidence to prove it. In the next scene, Martin knocks on Nancy's door and she lets him in. Nancy and Martin share some lighthearted conversation as Martin logs into her router to try and help her kick out whoever has been hacking into her system. He tells her that he found no external cameras connected to her router and that he installed her a new firewall, so she is now free from the hacker. She's ecstatic and surprised at how fast he did it. She tells him she would still like to know who it is. He assures her that he is running some tracking programs and will keep digging. She invites Martin to have some pasta and wine with her and he says yes, as long as he can help cook. As he's preparing some vegetables, she calls Simon and asks him to snoop in Sarah's office for anything suspicious and then asks one more request from Martin. She asks if he can fix her pillow. He does and makes her laugh from what he programmed the pillow to say. Then their eyes lock with romance in them. Martin leans in closer and the two begin to make out, kissing passionately. Meanwhile, Simon enters Sarah's office and begins searching her computer and inside her desk. He is startled by the whistling of the janitor and then the sound of Sarah approaching. He hides quickly. After Sarah leaves, Simon holds up a sticky note and says "Got ya." Back at Nancy's home, things are heating up between her and Martin. As they're making out on the couch, Nancy's home alarm goes off. They jump up to see who's there and Martin is confronted by Detective Burton pointing a gun at him. The detective came to Nancy's home and shows her the body of Doug. He had been shot in his car outside her house. Nancy again receives a text from Ross saying he wasn't the right one for you. Detective Burton seems to give more credence to Nancy's claims and that night Nancy and Martin answer questions for her. After Detective Burton leaves, Nancy gets a call from Gina. Gina says that someone is hacking into the company's bank account and they are hacking in from Nancy's server. Gina insists that her and Martin get to the office immediately. As soon as Nancy hangs up with Gina, Simon calls her and tells her he has proof that it is Sarah that has been hacking her. Nancy tells him he has to go to the police with this information. Simon finds Detective Burton and tells her he found Nancy's home and work password in Sarah's office. She asks for Sarah's last name. He says Blake. Sarah Blake. Detective Burton looks at a list on her phone that contains Sarah's name and abruptly excuses herself. As Nancy and Martin are walking in from the parking garage, Martin is messing with a phone. She asks him what he's doing. He said it's Doug's phone and that he must have dropped it while he was stalking around. She asks him why he didn't give it to the police since it's evidence. He said the police will take too long and the phone has the answers they need. Martin walks ahead and Nancy looks at him with a suspicious look. When they get inside, Gina begins yelling at Martin and Nancy, telling Martin he said their system was secure and telling Nancy the hacker logged in through her account. Martin asks Nancy if he can have a word with her. In the hallway, he shows her a text originating from Doug's phone to Gina stating that he knows Gina is the one stealing money from the company bank account and that he wants $500,000. Martin tells Nancy that Doug was blackmailing Gina, so this proves that Gina is the one stealing money and gave her motive to kill Doug. After Martin walks away, Nancy sees a failed text on Doug's phone telling her he's being framed. Meanwhile, Detective Burton is reviewing security footage from Nancy's driveway. She sees a white van parked in the driveway with the name Cyberline Systems on it. In his office, Martin logs into Lincoln Regional Bank. Nancy asks Gina if she can speak with her alone. Reluctantly, Gina agrees. Nancy shows Gina the message from Doug's phone to her demanding $500,000. Gina insists she would never embezzle money from the company and Nancy tells her she knows, but that someone got into Doug's phone. She goes on to tell Gina that Doug has been murdered. Gina knows this looks bad and now believes Nancy that some is trying to frame her. Sarah, overhearing their conversation from around the corner, looks scared and rushes away after Nancy tells Gina whoever it is has been 3 steps ahead of them this whole time. Simon calls Nancy but is on speakerphone as Gina listens in. Simon says that Sarah is still the main suspect. He then says there's no way it's just her, and at that moment the line begins to cut out, but Nancy and Gina can hear enough still to hear that Simon's car took over control, causing him to wreck before the phone went dead completely. As Nancy is trying desperately to figure out who could be behind everything, Gina approaches her quickly and tells her all the phones and elevators are down and all the doors are locked. Nancy then begins to suspect Martin. She sends a text to Ross's phone and hears it ding. She finds it in Martin's bag. Now Nancy and Gina know Martin has been behind everything, including Ross's death. At that same time, Detective Burton has found Martin's criminal record, which shows him to have been convicted of cyber-stalking. Nancy believes she is Martin's accomplice, even in Ross's death. Sarah rushes into Martin's office asking what he's doing with her money. He says he's sending it back. He said she doesn't deserve it for trying to hurt Nancy and making her look cheap by uploading the photos to her social feed. He then strangles Sarah and turns out the main lights in the office building. Nancy and Gina frantically look for anything to use as a weapon and then split up. Gina is looking desperately for a way out while Nancy looks for Martin and Sarah. Nancy enters Sarah's office. The door locks behind her. She finds Sarah dead in her office chair. In the break room, Gina trades her small knife out for a bigger knife. In the hallway, Martin appears. Nancy tries to leave Sarah's office just to find out she's locked in. Gina sees Martin about 20 feet away in the hallway. She hides the knife behind her back and pretends she doesn't suspect him. Meanwhile, Nancy logs into Sarah's computer using Sarah's face. In the break room, Gina is still trying to play coy as Martin slowly moves closer to her. Nancy finds pictures of her fiancé Ross on Sarah's computer. She then patches into the break room and overhears Martin telling Gina he made sure all evidence points to her. He then proceeds to pull out a gun and sets it on the table between them. After some hesitation, she grabs it quickly and points it at him, but after pulling the trigger realizes it's not loaded. Martin then beats her badly and she falls to the floor, though still breathing. Before he can finish her off, Nancy rushes in and hits him with a chair, then kicks him. Martin gets to his feet and tells Nancy she's ruining the plan, that he took care of Doug for her, and somebody has to go down for the murder. Nancy calls him psychotic. He tells her the plan is perfect and now they can be together like they're supposed to be. Nancy starts to play along as she edges her way backwards to grab the knife on the table. She tells him he picked the wrong girl before stabbing him. Nancy frantically tells Gina to get up and helps her to her feet. Just after the two of them hurry out of the break room, Martin staggers to his feet and pulls the knife out of himself, saying, "Fine, we'll do it the hard way." He then staggers down the hallway telling Nancy and Gina the plan as they hide under a desk in the next room. Still looking for them, Martin enters an office at the end of the hall and Nancy, through the app, locks him inside. Nancy tells Gina to stay there while she looks for a way out. Martin, realizing he's locked in Sarah's office, stabs the glass door with his knife, shattering it. As Martin begins walking down the hall, Nancy gets the elevator door open through the app. Martin slides open the elevator door, but she is then seen quietly sneaking up behind him. She rushes toward him and just as he turns around, she pushes him into the elevator shaft to his death. Little did Martin know when he opened it that the elevator was on a different floor. Nancy says rest in peace as she looks down into the shaft at Martin's lifeless body. In the last scene, Simon approaches and Nancy gives him a big hug, happy to see he's still alive after his crash. We also see that Nancy's reputation has been redeemed with her boss and Detective Burton, both now believing everything she had told them before. Gina then goes on to offer Nancy a partnership. Nancy agrees, but only if they can outsource IT, she says, and Gina agrees. In my humble opinion, this is an amazingly great thriller film and is definitely worth a watch. Thanks for watching. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment a movie you would like me to recap, and we'll see you for the next movie in a cup.